This is the Home Plate Podcast with Tito, Sarge, and Sabes. Serving up a triple play of sports, betting, and exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the game. Brought to you by Fog Coast Productions.
Hey, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Home Plate Podcast, brought to you by Fog Coast Productions. I am Tito Von Flavor, one of your three hosts, joined by my esteemed colleagues, Sabes and Sarge. That's Sean Sabian, Craig Sargent, in each one of those screens. We are really looking forward to a fun episode today. This is our third one, but our first where we've been able to land a very notable interview. He is the operator, owner, and founder, also known as the chief big guy of the San Francisco Niners Instagram page and Twitter page, our friend Brad Graham. Brad, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to talk some 49ers football, some draft, and everything in between.
Man, I think I can speak for all of us. We are excited to talk football as well. We are just coming off of a fun few weeks, month-long NCAA March Madness tournament where Sarge and I bet on every single game of March Madness. And boy, like we said kind of in the pre-show production, I am so glad that basketball is over. I can't wait to talk about football.
Yeah, let's go. I'm excited too.
So, as we get started and we head to the first quarter of our four-quarter show here, Brad, obviously Instagram, Twitter, you're all over the place. You've got over 80,000 followers. The SF Niners is a page that I've been following for a while. I know that Sabes and Sarge have been following pretty actively as well. 80,000 followers doesn't happen overnight. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, how you got started and your interest in football and draft and all things 49ers?
Yeah, man. So obviously it's been a long journey to get to 80K on Instagram, and it definitely takes some time to build that up. But taking a step back kind of goes back to my playing days back in college. Offensive lineman, I just love football. At the end of the day, I'm a football nerd. I just get a lot of excitement about learning new things, scouting players, and doing all that kind of stuff. So when I kind of stopped playing in around 2010, I had all this knowledge of football, but I had nothing to do with it. Like, where do I go with this? Like, I've been learning how to scout defenses and do things like that, but I wasn't playing anymore. I was going to art school. I was going to the Academy of Art in San Francisco for multimedia communications. And it's funny, this whole journey started in the Bleacher Report comment section when I started to kind of realize, hey, you know what? I think I might know a little bit more about football than these guys who are getting paid to write about it. And back in the day on Bleacher Report comment section, you could like and comment back, from other readers. And everything I'd always post was really well received, especially in regards to scouting. And when I stopped playing football, I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to be a scout. I wanted to be around football in any capacity. But obviously life goes on, and I transitioned to a career and got that part of my life going. So, but that love for football was always there, and it was just in the back of my head, like how do I, leverage this knowledge and do something with it? And it wasn't until about 2017, a couple years later, and seeing some of these other accounts that had already existed at the time, and just being like, I also had a, marketing background, social media marketing background, so I understood trends and things like that. So it was really just a perfect storm, and was able to essentially start the Instagram account. And since then, it's branched off into Facebook, Twitter. We're now doing YouTube, podcasts, all different kinds of things. And it honestly all started about me wanting to have people hear my scouting reports. That's really what it comes down to. But it's funny what it's turned into as a result.
No, it's fantastic. And like I said, your reach is continuing to grow. Instagram, I think for me is the one thing that I go to first. And I mean, you're posting great content, at a really high clip, high volume, and it is detailed. When you're looking for scouting reports and you're looking for a differentiator for kind of what you're reporting, because everyone can see scouting reports, they can see draft boards. What do you try to do differently to kind of, get yourself some exposure and create a market for yourself as opposed to just, Bleacher Report comment sections?
Well, I mean, in regards to scouting, like, obviously there are great influential, media scouts that I've, loved along the way. Mike Mayock is one of my favorite guys of all time. But I realized quickly there's not a ton after that I really feel like, I could listen to their opinion and be like, I believe you. So it really kind of set me apart because I, under kind of understanding football going into this, understanding how to watch tape and doing all that kind of stuff, I just decided, because it only took me one time getting burned by like reading someone else's evaluation and being like, that sounds good. That kind of matches with what I thought. And then I'm going to go ahead and regurgitate that. It took me one time getting burned doing that to realize I'm never doing that. And all my opinions that I try to facilitate are organic and come straight from me, comes straight from my experience and my context, from watching tape and doing all those other things. And the same thing comes from watching football, essentially. And one of the things with my account that I try to do that's different than a lot of others is there's a lot of analysts out there, correct? Like where we dissect, we break apart the game. We don't like this technique. We don't like how this play was called, X, Y, and Z. I decided, being a former player myself, that it would be really cool to create a brand that spoke to players, that like was inviting to players. We had the players' backs. And since then, we've created a great environment where we have a ton of player followers, not only from the 49ers, but from other teams. We're talking about N'Keal Harry offline. He follows me, Brian Burns, a bunch of other guys across the league. We've just developed like this kind of organic kind of melting pot, if you will, of content that players can ingest and digest, as well as their families. And I think that's something that's really important to me, because obviously anyone can critique and tell you what you're not doing well. I think it's harder sometimes to look through that and be like, well, this is what they're doing well, outside of these issues. So that's kind of something that's really stuck out to me in developing this community, on 49ers social.
Love it. I mean, Sabes, as a former football player, to you, that's got to be music to your ears, right? Somebody who's out there trying to put some content out that's not just for the masses to take in, but for former players and current players themselves, people who are going to get it a little bit differently.
Absolutely. You always want to create an inclusive environment, especially for these players. They're constantly under the spotlight. They're constantly under scrutiny. So to build a environment where they feel comfortable, where their families can come and ingest content regarding their loved ones, I think that's a fantastic attribute of Brad's page. And just to piggyback on what Brad was saying, I think it's great in his experiences of playing the game and now trying to get into the scouting world, but also being genuine, also being authentic, and not just regurgitating what he's seeing online, not just regurgitating mock drafts and big boards of other scouts and trying to put your own spin on things. I think this time of year, this draft season, you see a lot of that. You see a lot of people reading into the articles of what other guys are saying and just kind of pass that off as their own knowledge and their own take on the things. So I appreciate that Brad has implemented that into his scouting and the account itself.
Well, speaking of the draft, let's get into it. I know that everybody's champing at the bit at this point. Draft is right around the corner. Second quarter of this show is going to be dedicated to talking about, Brad, your thoughts surrounding the 49ers and the upcoming draft. I mean, we'll just hit the nail right on the head and go after the one that everybody's talking about. The number 3 pick that the Niners received by way of the Dolphins. Obviously, the rumor mill is all over the place. It's a quarterback-heavy draft early on. What are you seeing from these 5 quarterbacks that everybody's talking about? And where do you think the Niners land with, maybe 2 or 3 of them that they might be going after?
Yeah, I'm personally really excited about these top 5 quarterbacks. Since I've been following the draft closely for the better part of a decade, which is crazy to say out loud, um, I haven't seen a class this stacked at quarterback. We've seen plenty of quarterbacks get elevated and jolted to top 10, top 15. Your EJ Manuels, your Christian Ponders, your Blaine Gabberts. It happens every year because of the positional value that the quarterback position holds. That's always going to happen. But this year, out of any other year that I've scouted, it really feels like all 5 of these quarterbacks are deserving to go top 15, top 10 based on talent, based on attributes, and everything in between. And so for me personally, it's really exciting that the 49ers jumped up 2-3, traded 2 or 3 first-round picks, a third compensatory in 2022, and now basically have the chance to select Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Mac Jones, because it's seemingly feeling like Lawrence is 1 and Zach Wilson is 2 to the Jets, especially after yesterday's news with Sam Darnold being traded to Carolina. It really feels like the chips are now starting to fall in place. So in regards to like a global view of the quarterbacks, like it's a lot of fun. It's a ton of fun to debate if you're on the page. But in regards to the talent, they're all worthy of top 10, top 15 consideration, in my opinion.
Sarge, I mean, with the 3 remaining guys that Brad was just talking about, you've got, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Justin Fields. Just off the top of your head, or even gut instinct, or even with some personal information of your own, who do you think and who do you like? And then we'll kind of go around and see what everybody thinks.
I want Wilson bad, but to Brad's point, I think he is going the Jets. I mean, hopefully not. But my gut's telling me we're going Mac Jones. I know Niner fans, this guy's getting a bad rap already. I feel bad for the kid. The guy played lights out, and people are hating this guy. I don't know, but I feel like it's going to be Mac Jones. I was looking at Mike Shanahan's, quarterback tree of, he coached Montana, Young, Elway, Greasy, Jake the Snake Plummer, Go Devils, Cutler, McNabb, Grossman. I found a thing with Kyle Shanahan that I totally forgot about when he was with Cleveland. Legend has it that Manziel texted their quarterbacks coach, Dow Logans, and he forwarded that text message to Mike Pettine, who then drafted him, and Kyle was left out of the dark having Johnny Manziel and Brian Hoyer, and which was funny how Brian Hoyer came to the Niners and followed him. So I felt like Shanahan's never had his quarterback. So whoever is going to be picked at number 3 is going to be Kyle's guy, because I believe when we got Jimmy, that was a Lynch decision. I mean, obviously it was an all-in team decision, but Kyle's never had his guy. And the one guy he had, he made an MVP of Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan has not looked the same since he's left. So I'm excited. It's Kyle. The plays are going to be great. I just want someone who's smart and can play 16 or now 17 games. I'm sick of people getting injured.
No, that's a compelling way to put it. It's you're a strong believer that it's the system, not necessarily the person that we draft, that's going to make the difference. You like Kyle Shanahan. I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. Sabes, are you in that camp? Are you in that train of thought, or do you feel a little bit differently?
I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it is someone like Mac Jones, and I think it's okay for us 49ers fans to get in that mindset so we're not absolutely depressed and putting our faces in our hands and crying when that decision is made. I think what you always have to take into account is the scheme fit of some of these guys. I agree with Brad where all 5 of these guys have the talent and the ability to be worthy of a top 15 pick or being the top 5 guys in the first round at the quarterback position. But for me, I like to read more into the schematic fit of that quarterback. I really like Trey Lance. I know people are going to knock him for playing at a lower division, playing at North Dakota State, similar to Carson Wentz, same schools, same program. They do run more of a pro-style system. Of everything I've read and the limited amount of video I can consume on YouTube and other platforms, I think the ability is there. I think it would be a little more of a project. It would probably take a couple more years of experience and maturity versus a guy like Mac Jones or a guy like Justin Fields or if a miracle happens, a guy like Zach Wilson, I think those guys are more ready off the jump to be contributors right away. Trey Lance may be a guy in year 2, 3, or 4, like a Josh Allen. He may need those developmental reps, but he is certainly a guy I've started to focus on a little more, because it's not only his ability and character and his leadership that I like. It is that offensive scheme and more of a pro system, and that tape that is there as evidence for these scouts and coaches to consume. So I would love if Trey Lance was our pick at number 3.
Okay, so we've got the system pick where it could be Mac Jones, and that would work great. We've got a Trey Lance supporter. I mean, Brad, are you just going to come from the top rope here and tell us that Justin Fields is the future, or do you got another pick for us?
You guys set me up really nice here to go Justin Fields. Obviously, if you guys follow the page, we stand Justin Fields. But before I go and wax poetic on Justin Fields, both Craig and Sean make fantastic points about both the prospects that they like. With Mac Jones, you can definitely make the case that he's the best processor pre and post snap in this draft. And we understand with Kyle Shanahan and the scheme that he operates, you have to be cerebral, you have to be smart, you have to be able to put your team in a good position pre-snap to be successful post-snap. So in regards to Mac Jones, that's what he brings to the table. He brings the knowledge, he brings the experience of playing in the SEC with top talent. In a scheme that really resembles Kyle Shanahan's. When you look at Sarkisian and what he did, you can literally find the same exact plays that Sark and Kyle ran. And so it makes it really easy to see how Mac would be a seamless transition. The only knock with Mac is that he doesn't have the athletic ceiling as the other prospects. And obviously with this league and where everything is headed, or seemingly headed with your Lamar Jacksons, your Josh Allens, Patrick Mahomes, the list goes on with these young quarterbacks that are finding success in the NFL. It's just that thing that you look at, right? You just you see what Kyle can do with a Kirk Cousins-esque style quarterback, but then you see these other guys that have immense tools and athletic ability, and you just kind of think, what else could he do with those kinds of skill sets? So that's the big debate with Mac Jones, Trey Lance, and Justin Fields is for me is, I went to the Senior Bowl. I stood 10 feet away from Mac Jones and got to see him in person, got to watch him all week in practice. He didn't play in the game that week. But, I just was standing, if you've ever seen one of his press conferences at Alabama, you always see Landon Dickerson kind of in the background trolling his interviews. He was doing the same thing at the Senior Bowl, but I was just watching him and I was just looking at him. And again, like scouts and people who evaluate football players, sometimes you get fixated on the body, or they call him body beautiful or what have you. And I'm just looking at the kid. I'm like, man, have you fully gone through puberty yet? Like, he just looks kind of like this little awkward squatty body. And I'm just like, man, it's just like, and again, that's a very shallow way to scout. You don't scout that way. You either can play or you can't. But with Mac Jones, it's just he's capable. He can do short to intermediate. He can make throws down the seam. He can do everything. It's just there seems to be like that cap ceiling on the athletic ability. And then you transfer over to Trey Lance. And again, Sean makes great points. But you also look at the scheme that Trey ran at North Dakota State, and you see a lot of the same philosophies and concepts that Kyle runs in regards to play action, bootlegs, and all those kinds of things. And so I can see a situation where Trey actually is probably a better scheme fit for Kyle, more so than Justin Fields is at the moment. I would say out of all these prospects, maybe Justin Fields is the less likely to be the scheme fit based on what he did at Ohio State. But the biggest thing for me that leads me to landing on Justin Fields are the intangibles. I'm really big into psychology. I'm really big into sports psychology. I'm really big, especially into how that plays into quarterback play. And with what I saw from Justin Fields last season, dealing with the COVID year, watching him play with offensive linemen, like half his offensive line being out due to COVID, his coaches being gone due to COVID, his wide receivers being gone due to COVID, and him constantly battling through that on top of the scrutiny, coming out and doing what he did against Clemson. To me, that speaks volumes about someone's mental strength, someone's mental capacity as a leader, and things like that. And that's what I hold a lot of weight into. That's why I've kind of hitched my wagon to Justin Fields. Like, you guys could tell me right now that Mac Jones is going to be the pick at 3, and I'll believe it. I could see it. I understand the thought process. I understand why. It all makes sense. But I just see this guy in Justin Fields who is not perfect yet. He's not a refined, finished product. But I can just envision Kyle getting his hands on him, being the offensive genius that he is, and not only elevating Justin's game, but elevating his offense. And so it just gets me really excited, because going back to how this all started for me, and Kaepernick was my first ever draft crush. Like, first ever I fell in love with a prospect. It was Kaepernick and
Same.
what he brought as a runner and a passer. So again, I feel like we didn't really get to see that full potential from Kaepernick. And so I feel like, I talked about this the other day, because I'm running this page and I don't have to answer to coaches or personnel departments or anything, I choose to scout emotionally. I understand that's not how you should scout, but it makes it fun. It makes it, a lot more engaging for fans and what have you. Makes it more fun for me. And when we don't draft my guys, it hurts, but that's part of it. But when we do draft our guys, or the guys that I like, it makes everything worth it. So, Again, you can make the case for all 3 quarterbacks, and I can understand all 3 being slotted in there. But just for me and how I've watched Justin Fields progress throughout the season, the offseason, I just am really attached to him and the idea of what he could do in Kyle's scheme.
Man, ladies and gentlemen, Brad Graham, that's why he's got over 80,000 followers on Instagram alone. The SF Niners account, obviously breaking it all down. There's so much to unpack there. A couple things I wanted to just touch on that maybe you could follow up on briefly. I mean, you're talking about sports psychology. You're talking about having to play a college football season and professional season through COVID. Is that a separate wrinkle that is now added into how you're scouting, how other people are scouting, kind of the mental fortitude of dealing with a pandemic while also trying to play at a really high level?
I absolutely think that's something that scouts and personnel departments should be looking at least from an additional, like you said, a wrinkle to evaluate. Because one of the guys that I really like, who's probably going to be a day 3 guy at this point, is his name is Shaka Toney out of Penn State. He had a really solid junior year. They had Micah Parsons, is going to be arguably a top 10 pick in this draft. He opted out on top of losing a ton of starters on defense and plus going through immense COVID situations. And Penn State was a team that really siloed themselves. Like, there are a lot of other teams that you saw just get taken down by COVID because maybe they weren't being as smart off the field as they should. From everything I've studied about Penn State is that they took it very seriously. And Shaka Toney was a guy who rose to the top as a leader in that locker room and someone who really rallied everyone. They had a ton of young guys on defense, a ton of just different circumstances to deal with. And so I really like Shaka Toney specifically, not only because of his talent on the field, but what I've learned about him off the field. And so when you're looking to add leaders to your locker room, obviously you're going to have your dogs, you're going to have your mercenaries, you're going to have your guys that you just want to, get some production out of. But you're also going to want your leaders in that locker room who are going to be the voice and who are going to be the guys who gets everyone on the right page. So I think you can use this COVID year to go in to these college campuses to see, who stood up to the adversity when it hit, and who really battled through it and rose to the occasion, and who kind of fell to the wayside. Again, something I hold very highly in regard to scouting players So it's affected the way I've scouted, and so I would imagine, some teams are looking at that as well.
I mean, Sabes, we start to get into, kind of third day, third round, deeper into the draft. Anybody else that's coming to mind for the Niners off the top of your head that could make a difference, whether it's not enough press or game day coverage due to COVID, or just because they're a sleeper little golden nugget out there? I mean, who do you like?
Sure. I think the trend we've seen in the last several drafts is how offenses in the college game have evolved and have increased volume and have increased involvement and reps for wide receivers. And you've seen how deep these classes the last several years have been at receiver. I think that third guy, obviously losing a Kendrick Bourne, having a roster of some guys who have fought through injuries and haven't really been able to supplant themselves as that number 3 slot guy or just that third option. I think that is something they do need to address. Something Brad pointed out to us in the kind of side conversations we had, because I was talking about a guy like Kadarius Toney out of Florida. Obviously, he has the talent to go in the first round, late first round, maybe even the mid first round, just based off his tape. This guy is a yak monster. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he fully kind of fits that mold of what the Niners look for. But Brad, kind of changed my tune and said, there are a lot of guys like that later in the draft, whether it's the mid rounds or, 5, 6, 7. So a guy I've started to look into and I've read up on a little bit is a guy named Dwayne Eskridge out of Western Michigan. I think not only does he have the explosion and the ability to be a great contributor as that third slot receiver or just third option, he also is very versatile from a special teams standpoint. Apparently he's one of the better gunners and special teams players in the country, or at least projected to be. So any way you could find a guy in the middle to late rounds who can contribute on day one, especially on the special team side of the football, I think that's great. And rumor has it he's played a little bit of corner as well. So how do you not like a guy who's undersized, is going to be that scrappy third option, and isn't afraid to jump in right away, being a late round pick and contributing on special teams and going out there and tackling somebody as an offensive player? I just really fall in love with guys with versatility and that tough nose mindset to do whatever they can from day one to help this team win football games.
Man, I can just see Brad getting fired up over there, agreeing with what you're saying, nodding his head a couple different times. I mean, Brad, how great is it to find kind of those mid to late round gems that end up, either making an impact day one or just a great investment down the road for your football team?
I love scouting the later round gems because it's so much fun when they hit. Like it's, the first round's kind of somewhat predictive. Obviously, anything can happen, anything can change, and all that kind of stuff. But it's really fun when you get past the first round and, all the media analysts aren't like as focused on the first round or the later rounds as they are the first round. So it's a lot of fun to find these guys. And, Sean mentioned Dwayne Eskridge. I got to see him at the Senior Bowl in person, and he's as advertised. He's a legitimate speedster who can also play, in my opinion, every position at the wide receiver. He could play X, Y, and Z, in my opinion, even though his size would indicate he's probably more of a slot guy, or you would typically put him in the slot. But he has the ability, he has the routes, he has the suddenness, he has the agility and the hands and the aggressiveness to go after and get the ball. I didn't know he would play cornerback, so that is actually a nice little nugget because I love that. I look at a guy like Julian Edelman, who broke into the NFL by playing cornerback, special teams, ace, everything. Now we know him as one of the better wide receivers in the league. But one of the biggest plays that sticks out to me from Julian Edelman was him tackling LaDainian Tomlinson as a cornerback. And just that kind of grittiness and toughness, again, back to sports psychology and how these guys think mentally, I love that kind of stuff. So Dwayne Eskridge, the fact that he's mentioning Dwayne Eskridge, music to my ears.
Fantastic. Lots to look forward to. Draft coming up. Niners with lots of picks, obviously, as we touched on number 3. But what a fun segment. We are going to head to halftime and do a quick little ad run for our friends at Fog Coast Productions, who are handling all of the editing and marketing and helping us with a ton of social media for this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Fog Coast Productions, an award-winning video production company based right here in San Francisco. Whether you need a corporate video, animation, or want to create a podcast just like this one, Fog Coast Productions is the one-stop shop for all your multimedia production needs and much more. So give them a follow on Instagram at Fog Coast Productions, and you can also follow us on all social media platforms at Home Plate Podcast. Okay, we're going to head to the third quarter here at a halftime, and we're going to go a little nostalgia. We can keep it to players that we've seen. We can talk about players of years past, but we're going to get into favorite 49ers and just kind of the love for the San Francisco 49ers and that football club and some of the great people who have come through it. Sarge, I want to just start with you because you've got the 49ers beanie on. I know that you are as ready as anybody for another season, but it is always fun to talk to you about years past. So who's your guy?
I would want to say Roger Craig since I was named after Roger Craig, but I didn't get to really see him play. But my guy's Patrick Willis, man. Going those games at Candlestick, having 30 beers before the game, screaming every single play, and watching him all over the field was just electric, and that was the most fun time being a 49er fan of my young 31 years of life. Patrick Willis.
P. Willie was so great because I remember, Brad, from a scouting perspective, I'm sure you can touch on this a little bit. I remember hearing about Patrick Willis at Ole Miss, not really seeing much SEC football, not seeing a ton of Ole Miss football, at least at that point in time. But I remember being in high school and someone sending me a YouTube link of his highlight video of him playing with like a cast on his left hand and just absolutely destroying people. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's on my favorite football team now? I mean, how big was the YouTube highlight reel for favorite player content, when that was starting to get going on the internet?
Oh man, I wasn't up and running with my content at that point, but I know exactly those highlight videos you're talking about. I mean, you saw some of those tackles. One of them that, sticks in my head is him meeting a running back, right in the hole. It was like the gates opened up, and it's Patrick and the running back, and he just takes him and drives him into the ground, and you're like, man, that just looks like a generational guy. He just looks like one of those rare breeds. And he was one of my favorite players. He was actually the first player that I purchased his jersey, with my own hard-earned funds. He was someone that, I really looked up to quite a bit. And it was fun to have Patrick Willis on the team when he was available.
He's a 49ers icon. Sabes, I'm sure you've got another one for us.
Sure. Mine is of that same era. I'm going with Frank Gore, a Hall of Famer, a just outstanding professional football player. You never heard any grief. You never heard anything negative from Frank Gore's mouth playing for some of those teams that were just, quite frankly, abysmal. And he was going out there and pounding the rock 30 times a game, bled red and gold. It just means so much to me and all those games at Candlestick and being really one of the only relevant guys on the offensive side of the football for quite some years and being a Pro Bowler and being up there in the top 3-5 in rushing yards a year with an average team and an average offensive line at best. Frank Gore still out there doing it till his day. He'll always be a 49er to all of us. And my dream, I think we all would love this, if he could come back for maybe even just one snap and retire a Niner, and I'll run on the field and give him a hug. I'll get arrested for Frank Gore and just rush the field just for that one shining moment to be there with him. But Frank Gore, all-time legend, all-time great Niner.
It's such a fantastic pick. I mean, Frank the Tank. I mean, there's nobody better. He's the man. Brad, did you have, obviously you do what you do. So from a scouting perspective, I'm sure you've had your favorites over the years, but even from just a fan nostalgic perspective, do you have one guy either from that era or from eras past or even recent guys that you look to and just think, man, what a great 49er?
Yeah, this is honestly, I get asked this question a lot on the page, and it's honestly a really hard question to ask because, we've already named Patrick Willis, Frank Gore, two absolute legends. Like, I've got a couple behind me. You see Jerry Rice, you got Frank Gore, Vernon Davis. You could pick Joe Montana, you could pick Steve Young. I grew up, loving those early 2011, 12, 13 teams. The defenses were stacked. You had, Justin Smith. You had Alden Smith. You had Deshaun Goldson. Like, I could pick so many different players. But honestly, I have to be a little biased because it encapsulates everything that I do with this page. And he's just been someone who's been a great support, to the page and me personally. You guys have seen the energy that I put around Justin Fields, right? I'm big about draft crushes. I'm big about my guys. I had that same energy for an Iowa tight end who had only 700 receiving yards in the 4 years he played, and that was George Kittle. So George Kittle was someone that I identified in the pre-draft process because I'm an offensive lineman. If you can block, you have a key to my heart. And with George Kittle, when I was watching that draft class, out of offensive linemen, out of everyone, he was the best blocker in the class. I'm talking like legitimate elite blocker. So he grabbed my heart instantly. And then at the combine and getting to see him work and drill and move, you got to see that 4.52 speed. You got to see him catch passes, run routes, do all those things. And instantly I was like, this guy's legit. Like, you have the blocking ability, and then you bring the ability as a pass catcher behind it. Like, even though that he wasn't utilized, you could see that the talent was there. So again, being a big draft guy, staking my claim on a 5th round blocking tight end out of Iowa, shouting that he's going to be one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Those takes don't hit well in real time, but we draft him, of course, ecstatic. He was one of the first players to follow my account because obviously I was all about George Kittle back then. And to see his maturation, to see him not only from an on-field standpoint become arguably the best tight end in the NFL, talked about either him or Kelsey essentially, but who he is off the field. He's just a great guy. And the energy that he brings to the fan base, what he does just even on social media with fans, just to bring it full circle, I just really appreciate everything George does for this team and for this organization. And he's been a spark plug for us, even when we've been in down years and things like that. So I know it's a little bit recent and it's definitely a little bit biased, but I got so much respect for George and everything that he brings to this organization.
What a solid pick. I mean, I was a George Kittle fan before, but my Lord, I mean, now I'm ready to run through a brick wall for the guy. And he's bringing WWE wrestling back to the mainstream for Niners fans, which is super important in my opinion. I was just going to touch on, I mean, Brad, you were leading right into it. That 2011 era of 49ers is something that I remember so fondly going to Candlestick. Deshaun Goldson was going to be my pick. That not because he's an all-time legendary Ring of Honor 49er where they're going to retire his number, but because I think he truly represented that era so well. Hard-hitting, 2011, getting to that NFC Championship game against the Giants. I mean, it's him, it's Justin Smith, it's Patrick Willis, it's all those guys. I'm really hoping that we can get back to, something like that in the future. Obviously, we're coming off of, a Super Bowl appearance not too long ago, but, just tenacious defense, exciting offense. And I think, it is right around the corner. So let's head to the fourth quarter and let's talk about a little bit of the future. I know we don't have a set schedule for this year in regards to who we're playing each week. We do have an idea of the teams, Brad, just kind of off the top of your head, I know that, scouting and draft is your wheelhouse, but I'm sure you're looking at the schedule and thinking, where we're going to fall into place in regards to wins and losses. How do you like the Niners faring?
Yeah, so I've taken a look at the schedule, and of course, we're still early into the season. Obviously, free agency just landed, so we're kind of seeing how teams are reorganizing with all the coaching changes and things like that. So it is a little bit hard to kind of quote unquote predict or forecast out sometimes like this early in the process. But you just have to look. I just have to look at what the 49ers have done from a free agency standpoint, how they've set themselves up in the draft. Also looking at the division. The division, of course, the NFC West is extremely competitive. It kind of feels like an arms race at times of teams continuously trying to add pieces. The biggest thing to me for a path for the 49ers getting back to the playoffs is what's going on with Seattle. Because Seattle has seemingly been the gatekeeper for which team gets into the playoffs via the NFC West because of Russell Wilson. And I really want to know if Russell Wilson will be on this team, in 3 weeks. There were reports that came out that the Chicago Bears had laid out a great offer. They were talking into the late hours of the night, and then kind of last minute, when they seemingly thought they had a trade put together, Pete Carroll just said, no, we're not going to move forward with the trade. But it still feels like Russell Wilson wants to get out of that division. With Kyler Murray now, and then you add Stafford to the division, it's going to be really competitive. And honestly, with the 49ers, it's all come down to health. If the 49ers can stay healthy and play their brand of football and play their game, I don't see why they can't make it to the playoffs. I don't see why they can't go far into the playoffs, even with a rookie quarterback. Because if you go back to 2019, you look at the scheme that Shanahan built around Jimmy Garoppolo, who was coming off a torn ACL and rehabbing. You could tell that the scheme was meant to protect Jimmy, and you could make the case that offense that we see in 2021 with a rookie could look the same like it did in 2019. You just want to make sure you're playing efficient football, not turning it over, and getting back to running the football. So with the offensive line and how it's been built, bringing in Alex Mack, re-signing Trent Williams, kicking Daniel Brunskill back over to right guard, everything seems to indicate that the 49ers run game is going to get back to where it was like we saw in 2019, even glimpses in 2020. So again, if you can give me a solid 49ers run game, a quarterback who's going to take care of the football and not turn it over, and we get back to playing solid defense, I don't see why there's any reason why the 49ers can't go to the playoffs this year.
Well, and Craig, instead of 16 games, now we've got 17 games. That's one extra game to bet on your San Francisco 49ers. And I know you've got some early indicators as to how the season's going to go. What do you think, pal?
I'm glad we're playing the Bengals as our 17th game, so that spread would probably be minus 10.5 Niners on the road. Big dog I'm approaching, but we're playing a last place schedule. We're playing the Jaguars. We're playing the Bengals. Last year sucked for multiple different reasons. That was the same thing what happened with Jimmy. We got Bosa out of it. But obviously we traded up. The three are getting a quarterback who Kyle finally gets to pick, whoever that is. I can definitely see a Kansas City Chiefs, Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes patching off the torch type of deal. I don't know. I don't know if we trade Jimmy, but last place schedule seems nice. I am expecting over 9 wins. Hopefully our quarterback stays healthy. We should make the playoffs, man. My boy Ayuk is obviously my favorite player now. Obviously going to ASU. He's special. If you ever go back to the draft class, the draft room, when we selected Ayuk, I've never seen Kyle smile so hard. He was cheesing hard with Ayuk. So I was jacked up for that, but that's own bias enough. Over 9 wins, hopefully 10 or plus playoff time. Levi's, we're going tailgating, us four. We're having a couple man sodas together, and we're going to be loud and get that place rocking because it's missed fans for a year. We're the only stadium who got kicked out. So I'm pissed. So I'm ready to take advantage this year.
Sabes, you excited for a little 2021 San Francisco 49er football?
Absolute understatement for the word excitement. I can't wait. I think just the tailgate culture, getting people around each other. You pray and hope that we are going to get there. We got some time for hopefully this thing to pass over a little bit more. But yes, I can't wait to just be around my friends. The game itself obviously is a good time, but my God, do I miss a good tailgate and just chumming it up with the boys, seeing people that I don't get to see outside of those Niner tailgates. And obviously it's been a different year with COVID and people locked up, but I would routinely see people at these home games and at these tailgates, and to not have that in my life and to have that outlet, it's been really hard to deal with. I can't wait for this season to both everything that Brad and Craig have mentioned. It's a last place schedule. Everything is on the table for this team to succeed and at least sneak their way into the playoffs with the wild card spot. We're a perennial tough division. I hope to God that Russell Wilson gets traded. That would be phenomenal. I would love to see that. I think we saw with what Matt Stafford went for, Russell Wilson might go for 27 first-round picks for a trade for the next 30 years, if that's what Stafford's going for. So please, somebody just ruin their franchise for the rest of their tenure as the GM and give up as many draft picks as you can. Get Russell out of the division. I think he's a phenomenal quarterback, but God, do I hate playing him. Let's go, guys. It's draft season. The season's right around the corner. Let's get some tailgates. Let's have some fun.
I am so fired up. Brad, if you cannot tell, the three of us are first ballot Hall of Fame tailgaters. We'd love for you to join us one Sunday.
Man, I got to get out to one of those. I can't wait.
And let me tell you this, if Russell Wilson gets traded to any team outside of our division, I will buy an official NFL jersey, his jersey of that other team. Bears, Dolphins, Patriots, I don't care where he goes. I'll root for him on any other team. I'm just so tired of him being in the NFC West, ready for him to go. I agree. I'm fired up for 2021 football. I'm excited for the draft. I'm excited for everything. I'm just so glad college basketball is over. I lost all my money. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. What an amazing time to sit down and pick your brain and get the ins and outs of what it is that you do and how you see things and how you tie it all together. It's very, very cool. Again, Brad Graham of the SF Niners, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow him on all of those. We are the Home Plate Podcast, brought to you by Fog Coast Productions. For Sarge and Sabes, I am Tito Von Flavor. We will see you next week, where we will be discussing going back to checking in on the Golden State Warriors and a little bit of San Francisco Giants baseball. We got to touch base with both of our Bay Area teams that are out there fighting the good fight. All right, lads, this has been fun.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.